I think we all know why we're here. I'd like to bring up the panel that we've all been waiting for as quickly as possible, but I know if we've opened a newspaper in the last couple of years, or months especially, or our mobile phones, the bad news just keeps flowing, and the good news is hard to find. So to figure out what we're going to do in terms of acting and reacting, I'd like to invite our finance ministers up on stage. But first, could I get Andreas Streichel? He is the CEO of Erste Group Bank, up on stage. Followed by His Excellency Peter Kažimír, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the Slovak Republic. His Excellency Olaf Scholz, Vice Chancellor and Federal Minister of Finance of the Federal Republic of Germany. And last but definitely not the least, His Excellency Bruno Le Maire. He is Minister of Economy and Finance of the French Republic. Gentlemen, I think the easiest way to start once our waters are refreshed and changed would be to consider the news that has been flowing continuously, especially since 2016, if we discount all the news before that when it came to the financial crisis. We've got issues with transatlantic relationships. We've got a potential brewing trade war. We've got problems at home with populism, with fragmentation. We've got autocratic governments that are starting to raise their head, corruption issues that are starting to come to the forefront. It almost feels like the good news is drowned in the bad. So, and there is good news. I mean, unemployment levels are pretty darn good. Businesses are starting to invest, and we're seeing the investment plan starting to show some amount of success. So what I'd like for us to do on the stage to lay out the groundwork is to say, what are the 3 top concerns for you individually when it comes to what can impact the European economy? And Minister Le Maire, if I can start with you, it would be good to kind of set the stage for what concerns individual countries in Europe and, of course, the businesses.
Thank you. Good news is that the weather is beautiful in Tatras. Thank you, Peter. As far as the concerns are concerned, I will be very brief. I think that the first concern for the French economy and for the European economy as a whole and for the world economy is the risk of a trade war. I really think that the risk of a trade war might jeopardize growth all over Europe and all over the world, and especially a trade war between the United States and China. And I think that the role of the European countries should be to try to alleviate those difficulties and to try to find solutions to the risk of that trade war. The second concern is the lack of convergence among EU countries. We need more convergence, especially within the Eurozone. More convergence as far as competitiveness of the private companies is concerned, but also more convergence in the way we are dealing with our public expenses and public debt. We are all on the same boat. And that's why France is doing its best to try to reduce the level of public expenses and to meet the European commitments, because we are all on the same boat, and if there is any difficulty in one single country, one member of the Eurozone, it might have an effect on all the other members. And the third concern is the risk of having a new financial crisis without having been able to build the necessary tools to face that financial crisis. We should never forget that we are still living the consequences of the financial crisis of 2008, and that our citizen is waiting for us to take the dramatic decisions and the necessary decisions to face any kind of new financial crisis. We have built the Eurozone to be strong and to be together and to be able to face such a new financial crisis.
Vice Chancellor.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's a long list I would be able to tell you, but I will stick to 3. So the first is also the question of trade in the globalized economy. I think this is how we should put it. And what is our answers to that? We learn in these days what a luck the European Union is for all of us, because otherwise we would be in much bigger problems. And not a single country is now facing discussions with the United States about trade. It's all the European Union. And it was really amazing to see when we went there as ministers, discussed with our colleagues from the American administrations that they learn from day to day that there really is something called the European Union and that they have to tackle with them. And so I think it's the difficulty we have to face, but it's also a promise in the experience we have today. The second is, I will really subscribe what Bruno said, that we have to fulfill all the questions which are still on the agenda of doing the task after the last financial crisis. We did a lot, but we have not succeeded with the necessary steps, and we should, so that we are better prepared as we were 2008 and 2009. And so I think this is what we have to do, and I think there must be progress even up to the end of that year to be prepared. No one of us knows whether the next big financial crisis might happen in 1 year or in 20. But as we are not the ones deciding about the crisis when they come, it is necessary to be prepared and to be at all the times. The third is, I could mention some economic questions, but we will have time to debate them. So I will say the question that will speak about the question which bothers me most today. We are losing trust and confidence. The people are not very happy in the most rich and most industrialized countries. This is happening in Europe, this is happening in North America, this is happening in Japan, and this is happening in the Australian archipelago. So the traditional industrialized economies are the ones who are still the richest of the world and who will be for a long time. But they are not that confident that there is a good future for them and their children and their grandchildren. And this produces a lot of political problems and the rise of wrong answers to the problems we face. And while this is happening, we see that all over in the world, many people are looking quite confident to their future. There is 1 billion people raising to the middle class in Asia and other places, and we have the people who are unemployed, unskilled, uneducated, have no access to water, and is reducing dramatically. But this is the problem we face, and to be very honest, I think the answer we have to give at the place we live is the European Union, because this is the only way to tackle the problems and possibly to develop a future where people are more confident about us than they are today.
You're in an interesting position, Deputy Prime Minister, geographically and in terms of just the way you have to juxtapose these viewpoints. What are your top 3 concerns?
Sometimes it seems to me sometimes that we are the generation of people after the 2008, the generation of people which is waiting for the another crisis. And it's not. I think it's not good because we did a lot in many areas. And okay, I'm coming from the country. Slovakia is a country with a very successful story. We are talking about the economic growth with figures about 4% this year, next year 4.5%. We are talking about the Visegrad 4 group, but we know that we are not an island. There's a division of labor between there's a big influence of German economy, and so we know where we are. But we are, in the era of the rising wave of populism, egoism, and protectionism, and these global trends are really threats for us. And in my view, this is the momentum to deliver. And once Olaf mentioned the lack of trust, I think this is the biggest problem. Because I'm talking about the stability of political systems in our countries, and it's dramatically changed, over the last 10 years, So I'm a little bit frustrated looking at the process of, for example, the deepening of EMU. This is one very important issue. We are really committed to the further integration. We are pleased with Franco-German paper, Messenberg paper, presented just several weeks ago. But what we see that, we policymakers in Europe, we know what should be done, so media knows, businesses knows, but there's still we are not doing that, and so we are behind the curve because we are exporting, and this is my personal view, we used to export our domestic problems on the European level. Mm-hmm. And to be very short term, looking forward, so this shortened procedure or shortened approach, it's very dangerous to us. And the further integration or this is our destiny. This is my personal view. But and at the European level, this is always European. This is the second. This is not the first. That's a pity, I think.
Mm-hmm. Andreas, I think it brings in a facet that I'd love to hear from a banking perspective. When we talk about a deepening EMU, we're talking about the banking union, still not complete. At some point, what worries you and keeps you up at night when you're running a business the way you are?
Well, as you know, I don't consider myself a banker. I consider myself an entrepreneur who happens to run a financial company. And since I'm the only member of the working class on this podium, maybe let me take a different view.
But you know that the working class you represent is paid quite well.
That's not that. I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's bad.
All we report is dividends paid to the working class.
Right, before this becomes a bonus discussion, let's get your top 3 concerns.
Maybe I can really tell you the one thing that really worries me, because I'm an incredibly engaged European. I love Europe, and I actually think it's the best place to live in the world. And one of my fears is that in the future, if Europe continues like that, we will still be probably the loveliest place in the world to live in, but we will only get tourists. And that could be okay for parts of Europe, but all in all, I think we shouldn't go that way. And if I look back at what we did with our company, and I tell you why I mentioned that, is that I only started to really understand what I'm here for when I started to understand the why. Why does my company actually exist? And it took us a long time. We all know what we do and how we do it, but actually we found out long before the crisis, hopefully, thanks God, that we're here to create prosperity for the people in the region in which we work. That's our only purpose and nothing else. And if I compare now, and if you look at the trade war, the 3 main economic areas in the world, I know pretty much what the Chinese want. And they run China a bit like a company, and they regard the 1.2 billion Chinese as their employees, who slowly start to benefit from the management of the country. And I think for the moment, also in the United States, people know what the government really wants, whether you like it or not, but they're here for basically making sure that America beats everybody else economically in the world, and everybody else is a competitor. So they have a clear why. You might not like that why, but they have it. And my biggest fear is actually, can we get Europe, actually, the politicians in Europe, in Brussels and in the countries, to commonly agree on what do we want to make out of Europe? And is there a chance that at some point in time during the next 5-10 years, you will have a Europe of 27 where everybody says the same thing? This is where we want to have Europe in the future. This is what Europe actually stands for. Do we stand for a liberal, free economy with a lot more equality than in other countries. So the rich people are willing to give up more in order to help or not. Do we want to have open borders or not? And I'm getting very worried on what I see during the last years, because what I experience for the moment is exactly the opposite of what I hoped for Europe would be. As you know, I was extremely, the most joyful moment for me as a Central European was 1989. And even more so when finally Slovak Porsches and Hungarian BMWs and Polish Mercedes passed me by on the Austrian motorway, and I had no borders. And now I have a border. Basically, I have to wait on the border to Germany because it's being checked. It's a development that goes in the wrong direction. So I don't know where Europe actually stands for the moment, and I don't know whether our politicians will be able to agree on what Europe should be for the people in the world.
I think that's a
5 years
question
from now.
for the two of you, because I think at some point there have been a lot of headlines in the last couple of days. No thanks to the country I currently reside in, and I'm surprised that neither of you brought that up as a rather large concern. We know your viewpoints on it. Those were top headlines as well. But at some point, you need to, I think, that concern of where is Europe headed. We don't have the banking union, as I mentioned. You've talked about wanting to look at it completed in the next couple of months. But we have deposit insurance issues. We don't have any sort of a agreement and a solid answer to the tax on tech companies. There are lots of little gaps, as Andreas was pointing out, where Europe doesn't talk together.
If I may answer to
Yes,
the question. First of all, these are technical questions, but the key question raised by the only worker on the stage is a political one. And I think that we should raise the stake, and that's the difficulty that we are all facing, and we should all try to understand why populist parties, extremist parties, are gaining voters all over Europe, in Germany, in France, in Italy, all over Europe. We have to face that key political challenge. To me, because of the lack of political willingness, the lack of decisions, and the lack of vision. For the Eurozone, for instance, we have all the tools on the table. We just have to decide. For the digital taxation, we have been discussing for more than 12 months. We have a formal proposal from the EU Commission. We just have to decide. What are we waiting for? And then we have a lack of vision. I think that the basic of Europe is liberal democracy. And we should stick to that, because liberal democracy now are at stake. Then we have the political purposes that might gather all the European people. First, the fight against inequalities. That's a point raised by Olaf, and I really think that this is a critical issue. We don't want an economy in which the rich people are growing richer and richer, and the poorest people do not have any possibility to become rich. We need to fight against inequalities for the sake of preserving our cultural and political model, and also for the sake of economic efficiency. That's the first political purpose that we should put on the table to gather the European people. The second one is the fight against climate change. We are the only continent which has the willingness to really fight clearly and in an efficient way against climate change. The US have got rid of that. China is not able and is not in a situation to go this way. So we have to really reaffirm that we are all willing to give new tools and new instruments to fight against climate change. And the last critical point for Europe, even if it is not an economic point, is the necessity to protect our borders. Because we have to explain to our people that we are a continent which is not open to all the rest of the world. We are a political continent, and there is no political construction in the world history without borders. And when there is a lack of borders, it is in the end of the European construction and the end of any political construction. A last point, innovation. Innovation should be our driver, because I fully share your point of view and your assessment. I don't want Europe to become a huge Disneyland. And if we don't want Europe to become a huge Disneyland, we have to invest in innovation, in new technologies, in disruptive technologies. We have been able to build Airbus. We have been able to build Ariane and Arianespace. What are now the new technological borders? We need to gather our funding to face the challenges of artificial intelligence, space, new technologies, because if we want to keep that technological sovereignties, we need to invest far more.
Do you agree, Vice Chancellor? I mean, none of those points are arguable. It's the methodology of getting there.
I think this is important points, and I do agree very much. But I would like to answer to the question from a different perspective.
Yes, please.
I think we have to understand how the process of European integration worked so far. So there was in the beginning the attempt to do it with political ideas, for instance, forming a military union of Europe. This stopped then because there was no agreement, and then we started with building the best single market of the world. And we succeeded more or less. There's still something to do, especially if we look at the financial and the banking sector, and there's a lot of problems because it's quite difficult to build competitive big companies. So I think our idea about a competitive market is more looking within the market of Europe or the single countries, but not looking at global competitors, so that we have to form companies of a size which could compete, be successful in the global market. This is in many questions something to be discussed. But in the end, this is not the main question. The main question is that we are now at a stage where we have to discuss about political questions, and they are not, could not be answered by regulation, by rules, and court cases. So I'm coming from a federal country with a long history of federal tradition, and I think you remember the history of the Holy Roman Empire of German nation or something like that. It was all about rules, courts, and different powers fighting against each other. There was not a common strategy. And the city of Hamburg, I was the mayor of that city-state, had cases at the court for 150 years or so. And this should not be the model for the European Union. We should be a bit more integrated and a bit more able to define common political strategies. And so I think it's about foreign policy. I very much support the foreign minister of Germany saying that we should have not an unanimous vote in the Council of the Foreign Ministers. There should be a majority vote for having a common strategy. We should cooperate in building our defense infrastructure, which is meaning discussing about where we buy our military instruments. And if you compare the United States to Europe, they have 30 different ways of military instruments, weapons. We have, I think, approximately 180. It's absolutely clear that no one can pay for it, that it will not work, that there is a big pressure on exporting these things to the rest of the world without looking to political questions because the market is too small. So I think now we are at the stage where we should do that to form a common approach of buying the things we need for our European defense, for instance. We need a strategy on the European borders, which is not the border between Germany and Austria, which you mentioned. It is the border around of all of us, which my friend Bruno mentioned. And then we have, which is the next question, a common responsibility for those entering our European continent. And I think this is the lesson Austria learned, Germany learned, the Netherlands learned, Sweden learned mostly. Because if you think you are right in the center and you have not a border to the outside areas, and what happens at the borders is not your problem, it is a mistake. And so I think all the debates we had about refugees in 2015, 16, 17 started when we refused to be very helpful when the first refugees came via the Strait of Gibraltar from the North Africa to Spain and Portugal, and did not help them. So now is the time to show that we learned our lesson, that there is a common responsibility. However, we will find a solution, but we have to understand that thinking that this is not bothering any one of us is a mistake. And this is the same with all the questions of arbitrage with social welfare instruments, which should not happen, arbitrage with regulation, arbitrage with the way how we look at climate questions in industry or things like that. So this is what we have to do. And to give, and the end is, when we understand that there is possibly a world where we are still linked to the United States because of common grounds we have, looking at democracy, the rule of law, and things like that. But it might happen that the political strategy in the United States is more to look at the own interests, not looking who is the other friends on the democratic side. It is necessary that we build our Europe, that it is sovereign enough to be not pushed around. And this is the task the politicians now responsible have. If we are not able to face the challenges of a world of 10 billion inhabitants, we will be in a very difficult position. But if we are able to, we must be not desperate about the future of Europe. We have a chance to be very successful.
Optimism's pretty much all around on the stage, so I do want to give you a heads up that I would like to come to you for questions. We have a room full of experts, so please raise your hands when you're ready and give us a name. Refrain from any comments, a very short question to our panelists, and then we'll pick up the conversation from there.
Sure. Hi, I'm Marin Gazdik from IPM. One of the biggest advantages in the global economy, and this talk is about the economic future of Europe, is technology. And Monsieur Le Maire, you mentioned already technological sovereignty.
Shorter question.
What I'm curious to know from you is how do you think Europe should be going about preserving technological sovereignty, and what would be the next steps for that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Andreas?
I like that question because Mr. Le Maire said something which I fully agree with him. It's a shame that it takes us 12 months to decide on digital tax in Europe because the Dutch don't want it. But I don't think it's the biggest problem. And I think I would like our politicians actually to think about why don't we have any large digital companies before we think about taxation of digital companies. Our problem is that we don't have any major companies. Why do the Americans have Amazon, Facebook, Google, and so on? And why do the Chinese have Alibaba, Tencent, and so on? And why is the biggest digital company in Europe SAP? This is the real issue that we have. Why don't we have it? Why do we not have the young entrepreneurs like the Americans have, like the Chinese have, that build companies like that? And part of the reason why we don't have it is that we are not even able to build a banking union, and we are just light years away of building a capital market union. And that's going to take another 50 years. What will happen until then? But we're thinking already about taxing a capital market union before we even have it. And this is the issue that we presently have in Europe. We should be, and you mentioned the fact that there could be another financial crisis. Everybody is talking about American banks having done a better job than European banks. I can promise you, the French, the English, the German, and the Austrian and the Slovak bankers are by no means dumber than the Americans. Our problem is that we finance 75% of the economy of Europe. Therefore, we are a big problem if something goes wrong. And the American banks finance 25 of the American economy. So if they do something wrong, it's a small problem, a smaller problem for America. So we have to think about on how can we build together a market where we can get young entrepreneurs to invest, where we get the money from them so that we can have our European Amazon, our European Facebook, and we don't have to buy it from the Americans. And please, let's talk about that. That would be wonderful. If we
Deputy
start
Minister?
talking about that, I'd be really happy.
Let's talk about it.
No, no,
Give,
just now,
make
now we
Andrea's
see
wish
how-
come true.
Now we see how hard working class in banks is there. Okay, but I fully agree with this. The partial 75% of credits are granted by European banks, and there's a lag of this capital market union, but we are very far from also from the new technologies like blockchain or cryptocurrencies assets. Just looking at this as a inevitable future which is coming, you know. So once I've been in Asian Forum this January, so just to understand the substance of discussion is then definitely you understand that we are lacking in that area. And just I would like to must fully agree with Bruno's manifesto, because Bruno presented manifesto today here, and I just would like to add maybe that let's put several principles. Let's put the European interest on the top of everything, because now there is a real threat, European threat about our future, and you know we have to find out the protects and respects, because we have to find in every piece of European mosaic something which is protecting and respecting national interests. Let's cooperate closer and more effective. Just, you know, and this is about the division about the West and East, which is here. We used to divide during the debt crisis about the North and South, but it's this division between East and West on migration issues, for example, just very, very frank, is here. You know? So just cooperate closer and not to focus on building of new walls, which are also here. They are raising in Europe. And what I see as a politician is the most important is that we have to deliver something which is understandable to the Europeans, you know, because they must touch it, they must feel it, they must see it, because our language sometimes it's really not very understandable to our voters, to our people.
I agree with Peter, but I think that all the solutions will not come from politicians. Responsibilities are shared between politicians and also CEOs of huge private companies and small entrepreneurs.
I think.
And I would like to say also that we can do both. Digital taxation and European digital giants. And both issues are linked, because when you have startups in France or in Germany or in any other member states, small startups
Slovakia.
with a level of taxation 40 points beyond Google, Amazon, and Facebook, you don't have the same chance of succeeding. That's why I'm so much advocating for a decision on digital taxation on internet giants by the end of this year, and I'm quite confident that we will be
But
able
Minister,
to do so. But
there's also a question there then of
there are
different
many
VAT
questions
schemes. I
behind.
mean, startups would list out a list
No,
of things
but
that
there
are wrong with
many
the system.
questions behind, and to answer to the question just raised. First of all, there is a lack of capital. We need capital if we want our startup to scale up. We need a more integrated union. We need a capital market union. We need a banking union, because the size of the market is the critical point. So let's go this way of having a common market, an integrated common market, a banking union, for the sake of having a totally integrated market with 400 and 50 consumers with the same rules. And then you will see that our startups will be able to scale up. There is also a last question, which is the lack of cooperation among huge private companies all over Europe. Let's take the example of electric batteries. Germany is moving on this critical technique of electric batteries. France is moving on. Yeah. Everybody is moving on its own track, on its own way, and we are not able to find a better cooperation among our private companies. And I think it's up to Olaf and myself, but also up to the CEOs of those huge companies to find a way of a better cooperation. Otherwise, we will be able to rely on Chinese or American technologies.
I'm going to give the Vice Chancellor the word, since at some point a lot of this comes back to you in terms of the amount of agreement between the two big hitters in the Ministry of Finances of the two countries that matter right now.
I think we are on a good track, and I'm quite optimistic about the question of banking union and capital market union, because we defined the agenda, we know what we want to get, and most of the questions linked to the banking union could be solved this year, and we know what could be the results. We made a proposal which is very near to reality, and we try to convince anyone else, and I think we will succeed. So just to come to the question, and I would like to give two answers. Mm-hmm. The first is, yes, we have to do something to have really a single market in certain questions. And there is a lot of differences which are not too big and which could be solved, and we should do so. So in cases of information technologies and digitalization, I think there is something still to do, though there had been made a big progress, because I think that the privacy regulation we have from the European Union is not just regulating the questions, it's also forming a common market, because this is giving a European perspective to those dealing in that field. What we are to reach still is that there is no arbitrage in governance. This is something we should accept always, that it is not nice if a single authority is saying, if you go to my country, we will not look that strict to the rules. And this is something that could not happen in Europe, and it is our common case to avoid things like that. But there is something to do. And the second is, I would say, mostly to the private sector, but we have to discuss it together and to find a solution. And it's mentioned, 80% of financing companies in the United States is equity. In Europe and even in Germany, it's 20%. And this is a mistake. This is the biggest difficulty for our competitiveness in the world. Yes, there is public money, and we build funds, we support startups, we support seed financing, we support the growth financing. But this is modeling a capitalist market with no capitalists. So I'm absolutely unhappy about the fact that the money which is there in Europe and the people that are willing to invest money are not using the path which is common in the United States. And this is not the answer of our tax policies. It's not the question of regulation. We can discuss them and we can solve them, and we are all willing to. But if no one is willing to put his money into a new company, this is a mistake. Let me give you a successful German example. There is a company founded in Hamburg as a startup called MyTaxi, which is the European legal Uber. And it's really successful. But Uber got billions from equity markets without earning a single dollar, or they earn some money but not enough for paying it back so far. This company is earning money, but it had the chance to grow because at a certain stage the German Telekom invested, and at the second stage Daimler-Benz did so, but not 100,000 of millionaires and billionaires in Europe saying, this is the idea, and if I join this thing and we give them 5 or 6 billion monies, they will compete Uber. And this is what we have to change. And if you look at the big success stories of the digital companies in the United States, if you look at Microsoft at the beginning, if you look at Google, if you look at all the others, which are now named always, Airbnb, many of them had a long time without earning enough money for paying back what they got from the capital market. But there was trust that this could be a good idea, and there was a certain way of entrepreneurship from the financial market.
Vice Chancellor, are you suggesting that the European economy turn itself into some sort of a mirror image of the Americans in some way then? Because this is a banking economy at the end of the day versus a financial market-run economy in the US.
But this is just this is something you can say. I think we need more equity, we need more money that is invested into new ideas and growing companies, because there is an entrepreneurial style in investment. And this is not the task of a bank. A bank is not the one to give a credit to someone without being absolutely sure that they will get their money back. It must be something which is equity financing. This could be organized by banks as well, but it must be, it's a different task and a different story.
I'm going to give you a chance for a very short rebuttal and a question from the front to follow.
This is wonderful. I mean, this is a German Minister of Finance says that. This is dream. I'm really happy. It's a dream for me. It's the first time I heard that, huh? Because you said exactly the right thing. The problem is what you speak about is we need a capital market culture in Europe. We shouldn't go the American way. But if one day we can go 50-50, Europe would be a great place. The problem is I do not believe that we have a capital market culture. And it will be up to you and you to develop it. Because there are two countries in Europe that have a capital market culture. One is Switzerland, that has never been in the EU, and one is the UK that's about to leave. So there is a great responsibility. If you do that, I will, the first time in my life, I will only say nice things about politicians.
Oh, that's saying a lot.
We have to win the political battle, because that's exactly what we are doing in France, trying to build a capital market culture. And when you are doing so, you are being accused of making a policy for rich people. That's the key political
That's a problem. That's why a Christian Democrat or a Social Democrat doesn't dare to mention the word capital. Because we have to, capitalist pension funds. Pension fund, it's the people. In the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, we have no capital market. We get deposits and deposits and deposits on which we pay our clients nothing. If I could find a way on how can have the Slovaks participate in the success of the Slovak economy, it would be wonderful.
Well, let's move to a question from the front. Your name and a very short question and who you're addressing it to.
Milan Ježovica, senior fellow MESA 10, Bratislava, Slovakia. I was very much intrigued by Mr. Minister's conditionality, saying that if the United States doesn't want to walk with us, then we should be more sovereign. And I know that this was a well-meant conditionality, and of course when we are in the mountains you understand that it's better to climb in pairs than alone. And it's also costly to become sovereign. But I'd like to push it a little bit more, and that is, shouldn't we become more sovereign because we need it, not because the United States doesn't want to walk with us? Should we become more competitive because it's our decision and we need to?
We should be more competitive because it's our decision. We should be more successful because we developed the model of a social welfare economy that is successful on global markets, which is, I think, the European way of doing it. We should be successful because we understand that now learning that it is about politics when we discuss about the future of European Union, and it's not just regulation, market, and things like that, which are still important, but not the most important questions. But that I argued in the way I did, and you mentioned, is I'm still very much in favor of the common idea of democracy and rule of law, and the United States are best friends. How else is it? And the people of the United States are also, and I'm a very transatlantic politician. So thinking about developing the European Union is not just because this might change. And doing it is not because we don't want to have, but also developing the European Union is not a way of competing others. It's what we do for ourselves, but we are still in an alliance with the United States, and we should not forget that this worked quite well for a long time, and that we have common grounds, and this is of biggest importance for the future of the world. And I think that there is a good chance that the American people are looking at the things very similar as we do.
Minister Limmer, I wanted to follow up on that with a question. What has your perspective been when you have dealt with Washington when it comes to the attitude, the kind of belief that you can have in talks, in closed-door talks with them, and when you look at them strike deals with Canada and Mexico after a lot of posturing, is what's happening with Europe similar to that, or do you see it escalating beyond control and then coming back to the point that we would have to be a little bit more sovereign and a little bit more self-reliant?
The US are, of course, our closest allies, and it will remain so. But I strongly believe that Donald Trump is the best incentive for a stronger Europe. Let's take 3 examples. First of all, trade. Donald Trump has decided to open a trade war, and he thinks that he will win that trade war. I think that nobody will win the trade war. But together we have been able to face the challenge posed by that decision from Donald Trump. And we had a common reaction due to the Commission, and thank you, Margaret Vestager, and thank you, Cecilia Malmström. Let's imagine that there would not be any Europe, and that every state would have gone to Washington trying to defend its case with Washington. We would have been destroyed. And it was exactly the contrary. Because we were together, we have been strong, and we have been able to face the decision of Donald Trump, and we have been able to obtain a change in the decisions of Donald Trump. So that's the first example that due to Donald Trump, Europe is stronger and is aware of the necessity of being stronger and more integrated. Second example, extraterritorial sanctions. We cannot accept to have that kind of attitude coming from Washington. And France strongly refuses any kind of extraterritorial sanctions. We are free to make trade with whatever state we want. And it's not up to Washington or to the United States, even if they are our closest allies, to decide whether we are allowed to make trade with Iran. And I'm deeply convinced that the outcome of that crisis with Iran will be the possibility for Europe to have its own independent financial institution so that we will be able to make trade with whatever country we want. Mm-hmm. Third example, the question of the relationship with China. Due to the attitude of Donald Trump, I think that we will promote free trade, we will promote new international institutions so that we will be in a situation to avoid a trade war between the US and China, and we will also tackle the key issues of intellectual property, access to the Chinese market, and so on. So I think that we should seize this opportunity of the current US administration, seize the opportunity of the aggressive attitude of Donald Trump to build a stronger Europe and to be more independent.
Deputy Prime Minister, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of your economy. If this trade war happens, and take out the supply chain, if you see any benefits for Slovakia when it comes to trade with the Chinese, does it open a door? Does it help Europe and your economy to open a door into the Chinese market that possibly hasn't happened till now?
Well, why
Are
you
you
just started
optimistic
with
or
Chinese
negative?
now at the moment? Just a little bit, I would like to mention on this USA, you know, and this trade war with that very humble mitigation to this potential conflict is that we just decided to buy new 14 fighters from USA, you know. And, you know, as a responsible member of NATO, we are going to double defense spending, you know, in coming years.
Mr. Trump is happy.
And just, I would like to raise this issue because, you know,
You should buy Rafale.
you should. we bought because we're cheaper and we achieve the highest value for money. But you know, that's a reality. We are going to increase the defense spending, and definitely, you know. So and this is I think opportunity for Europe, you know, because okay, we are not pleased to pump the money out of Europe. I think it could be much better, you know, to focus in Europe on our capacities. And the PESCO is an excellent initiative in this area because we were again isolated in this world on this part of spending. And you know, I will end with Chinese, but on Brexit, for example, in my country this is a really Slovak paradox, but a little bit we are benefiting from the Brexit because I don't know if you know, but in this country we are going to launch the Jaguar Land Rover factory, the plant. Now our Indian, British friends invested more than £1 billion in this country as the first phase. Now we are working on the second phase. They decided to do it before Brexit referendum, but we were a little bit afraid after outcome of Brexit referendum. But the response from headquarters in New Delhi, from Tata Group and from Birmingham was speed up, please speed up the investment. No. So this is, you know, do you see that this is a really different approach from our side? And on Chinese, you know, we see this wave of investment. Again, my country is exception because we don't have a lot of investment from China. Other Visegrad 4 countries, I think they can be pleased much more. But I'm not sorry for that, you know, because I think what we need a high quality of investment, not just cherry picking and just investment where the transparency of money is the problem and a lot of issues. So we need a kind of regulation in this area. So we are not the tiger or leaders in this area and the Chinese investors.
I think that brings up the question, since we're talking about Brexit, it brings up the question about banks. We come back to banks. We come back then to Italy and in the examples that we can have of the strengthening of the banking system itself. I'm surprised that for about, let's say, 45 minutes, we haven't touched on one of the bigger concerns for the markets, which would be not just a potential trade war, but also what's happening in Italy. Where do you all come down on Brexit, Italy as domestic issues? Because they do reflect a little bit about the populism issues that we've seen really simmer.
I think we should be absolutely clear that there is in any country a responsibility for their own problems. And this is not a scandal, this is democracy. So we should be aware that there is different elections, and I would like to tell you, Germany consists out of 16 states with a long tradition, more or less, raising a lot of money, having their own taxes, doing most of the state business in our country. And there is a lot of different colors in the different governments in Germany. And there is not a crisis because there is a change in government in one of the countries. And we have to deal with each other. And this is the same, and I think we could learn from that in the European Union. If there is a change in government, we should not be absolutely we should not start discussing if this is a problem or not. This will happen all the times, and we will always have to deal with different men and women ruling the countries, and if it is democracies, there will be changes as there were changes. And so this is how we have to...
But you're not worried at all that Italy is going to become another Greece? Because, of course, the
No,
stories
there
are
is
very different of the
nothing,
economies.
there is nothing like this which we could see. I think the big story about how we tackled the crisis is that in the end we helped the Irish Republic, we helped Portugal, we helped Spain, we helped Greece. Now anyone is out of the program, but we were able to do this within the Euro countries, which, and if you look at the small Greece, it was the biggest program which ever was developed for a single country in the world. Even the IMF never developed a program of this size. So we are strong and we are able to help each other if there is a need to. And the second is, we made a lot of progress in forming banking union, capital market union. Yes, there is urgency for doing more, and because of many reasons we are very hard working, especially the two of us or the three of us, to get this. But I think it is an Italian question, and if you have a lot of debt, you always have to be aware of the financial markets for financing your debt. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend to my people that it is worthwhile that we increase the public debt during the crisis 2008, 9 and 10 to 80% of GDP, and that we now decrease it down under 60%, and that we will decrease it more because we need the strength to be able to act in a crisis without being having the need to ask others for help and to look what the markets will say or so. And this is what we could recommend to others, but it's their decision whether they will do so or not. So I think calm down. And when the new government arose, we said, the president said they will stick to the European rules. The prime minister said he will stick to the European rules. The foreign minister said he will stick to the European rules. The finance and economy minister said he will stick to the European rules. And we have to take their words and not discuss if this might be so or so. We will see. So I'm not. We are looking at it. We are in. It is all our Europe. We are thinking about the future of Italy. We hope the best for the Italian people because we like them, and we are very happy to be together with them in our common European Union. And now it's their government to take the right decisions. Looking at the Brexit, I will not say too much things because we are on the last stages of trying to get an agreement. But I'm not.
Will we get an agreement?
I hope so, and let us be optimistic on such a nice site. But I think it was a mistake. It's also a warning to all of us in the European Union, because the big mistake that happened is the following. The people were angry about globalization, and they thought the European Union is the agent of globalization. But it is possibly our answer to tackle the problems of globalization. And this is something which we have to think about, and it has to do with the problems we discussed before. If we do not have political problems and stick to market rules, it will not be the answer for the people, and then they think that this is a problem. And so we have to change the way how we get progress in the European Union. It must be more politics, as it had been in the years before. And since we try to get an agreement, it's also the message we would to have a good neighborhood with the British people. They are big friends. But in the end, it is the big task then to form the European Union even more strict. As you might understand, 85% of GDP will be produced in euro afterwards. This will have an impact we cannot count. We cannot now reckon what it will be, but it will be.
I know we're running out of time, and I know we have so many questions. I have a whole diary full, which I've not even gotten to. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I do want to get the key points, a minute each, if you could, of what you would like to see accomplished, since we're talking about accomplishing something in the European Union, in the next 3 to 6 months. Andreas, what would you like to see actioned in the face of all that we face?
Well, from my point of view, it's very easy. I think we have to get Brexit behind us in hopefully a good way, and we have to solve the Italian problem. I think the language that is used from some of the politicians in Italy and also in other countries is just not appropriate anymore. We have to tackle that issue. And I quite frankly believe that this is an issue that will make the development of a banking union in Europe more difficult, because with that kind of government in Italy, to form a common depository scheme is not making it easier for the other countries. So this is very unfortunate. But I'm walking out of here full of joy, because I think one of the biggest
I think you made a mistake.
issues for me is that we create a common capital market in Europe in which we all join to finally be able to beat the Chinese and the Americans. I'd love that.
Deputy Prime Minister.
From my side, I'm the member of team of the Eurozone, so we would like to complete the banking union and focusing on ESM, backstop in ESM. I think we can...
In the next 3 to 6 months.
We can go in for... Yes, definitely. Yes, we're working on that. So I do hope before Christmas we can come together with Mario Centeno will come, and with Olaf and Bruno, we can celebrate all together this event. With EDIS, I do expect, I fully agree with Andreas that it's going to be much more difficult, because this is a level of trust about the depositors among the countries, and it's really and MPLs and all these issues are involved. So this is not the easiest way. Trade war, really, just to stay calm and to mitigate all possible and don't to irritate another waves of responses on that. And digital tax for us, this is something which can be, because we are talking a lot in Europe. We used to talk, this is very nice to talk, but we have to deliver. And this is something which we can explain to the people that this is fair, because we are talking about a fair taxation. Nothing. This is not. We are not going to penalize these companies for their success or for something like that. We just want to fair taxation, just on behalf of all taxpayers, because I think that's it.
Vice Chancellor, what would you like to see accomplished in the next 3 to 6 months?
There's a long story. I just will say I would appreciate very much if the participation rate in the European elections would be very high, because we try to form a democratic building, and it needs the people to take their decision.
Mr. Lemaire?
So many things.
1 minute.
There are things to be completed. I mean, the Brexit, for instance. There are things to be delivered, capital market union, digital taxation. And there are things to be launched. I mean, for instance, a fund, a common European fund for disruptive innovation, so that we can build on technological sovereignty. And the dream behind that is exactly the same as yours. I want Europe to be an independent political and economic continent as strong as China and the US. And I think that's feasible.
Mr. Lemaire, Vice Chancellor, Deputy Prime Minister, Andreas, thank you all very much. Please give them a round of applause for their honesty. And give yourself a round of applause for sitting through it all.